Normally, I like to snark about the various sponsors that sponsor these episodes, but I'm faced with a bit of a challenge because this episode is sponsored in part by A Cloud Guru. They're the company that's sort of famous for teaching the world to cloud, and it's very, very hard to come up with anything meaningfully insulting about them. So I'm not really going to try. They've recently improved their platform significantly, and it brings both the benefits of A Cloud Guru that we all know and love, as well as the recently acquired Linux Academy together. That means that there's now an effective, hands-on, and comprehensive skills development platform for AWS, Azure, Google Cloud, and beyond. Yes, and beyond is doing a lot of heavy lifting right there in that sentence. They have a bunch of new courses and labs that are available. For my purposes, they have a terrific learn by doing experience that you absolutely want to take a look at. And they also have business offerings as well under ACG for Business. Check them out. Visit acloudguru.com to learn more. Tell them Corey sent you and wait for them to instinctively flinch. That's acloudguru.com. Back in February, before these unprecedented times, I decided it was time to play Explore That Cloud with DigitalOcean. They'd be sponsoring some of my nonsense in the near future, but this is why I have sponsorship folks on my end, namely to serve as an editorial firewall. Now, for better or worse, as I mentioned when I did it at the time, that investment won't save them, but it did in turn give me a link that offered free credits to try them out. Links to that in the show notes if you care. So, all right, that gives me enough to get started with. Let's play with it. So I went to DigitalOcean and tried to sign up, and I saw initially that to create an account, I was being offered the chance to OAuth through my GitHub account. And on the one hand, I was immediately taken aback by the idea of using GitHub to OAuth into my cloud provider. And after about a moment's thought, I realized that this was patently absurd. GitHub has all of my code already. Hell, GitHub is where I store my access credentials accidentally anyway, so I may as well go ahead and use it. From there, it got a little strange. I reached an oddly designed interstitial page where Cloudflare asked me whether or not I was a sarcastic robot, and this all offends my robotic nature. I wasn't doing anything nutty here. It was from my home internet connection. So I clicked the I'm not a robot button, and then I got a Google reCAPTCHA telling me to hurry up and solve the problem. It's great. We need you to do unpaid AI work for us quickly before the car blows through the intersection, because it was click all the squares with traffic lights in it. Great. I assume that's how their self-driving cars work. So after that happened, I got a quick email of click here to confirm this is really you, and I was in. Now, next I had to set up a billing system. Cool. It turns out that they accept Bitcoin. Just kidding. Can you even imagine? They're running a business, not a money laundering scheme. Of course they're not going to take Bitcoin. They're going to go ahead and instead take a credit card. One thing that always grinds my gears, though, is that when I started typing out my address, great, it autofills my address using some random service. Like after I got to the third or fourth letter of the street I live on, it auto-populated the rest. Then it goes back and asks me to put in my zip code again. Manually. I don't understand why it does that. So I did. Then it wound up correcting the zip code to the long form version. If you know the answer, why are you asking me? Next, it was pretty clear the marketers had gotten to their sign-up flow, because what the first thing it asked me was, great, create your first project. What am I going to call it? Cool. And this one, it was called Drowning Polo Pony in the Digital Ocean. The next question that I had to give an answer to was, what is your project for? Great. It's mandatory, which was not super awesome. So I had to pick something at random. But then it told me, great, tell us which tools and technologies you plan to use on DigitalOcean. I pretended that I was an employee at iRobot and that these are AWS services as displayed by many of their architectural diagrams and talks that they've given. So I selected all of them. That's right. There were at least 3 screens full of technology stacks here that I could wind up including. So at DigitalOcean's marketing department, it is now very clearly gin o'clock when someone has to go through all of that nonsense. I also added a bunch of other technologies that I wasn't asked to include, like FreeBSD, COBOL, Postfix, Oracle Cloud, Systemd, Perl, ZSH, Akamai, Wells Fargo, Python a second time, and so on and so forth. Now, from there, credit where credit's due. DigitalOcean's dashboard clearly passes my iron test of bullshit that I've just run on them and doesn't try to show me everything that I've just checked off on the box. It gave me a bunch of suggestions but it wasn't an overwhelming number of you want to spin up a new droplet yourself, or do you want to install Docker, Doku, or Django, all of which I had, of course, selected. Nothing it suggested was patently unreasonable other than the insulting insinuation that I would willingly use Docker for something. From there, I went through my standard cloud test drive environment, which is spinning up a Unix or Linux instance by myself. And it would have been pretty embarrassing for DigitalOcean if this fails, because this has been their bread and butter of what they do as a company since they launched. I was pleasantly surprised to discover that FreeBSD was, in fact, a first-class citizen here. Now, FreeBSD is great, but I wanted to go with a different, more mainstream operating system this time, so I picked one of their Linux distributions. Now, there were a few to choose from. We already discounted FreeBSD, but the others it suggested were Ubuntu, Fedora, Debian, and CentOS. So I picked Ubuntu because CentOS is from my past. I used to be involved with the project a bit, and it's time to move on. I don't feel like being insulted if I have to ask for help, so Debian's out. And although I expect to run this thing for all of 20 minutes, there's a great chance that Fedora would have gone end of life before that 20-minute threshold was reached. So once I selected that, there was a bit of a dark pattern, because the next thing I was told to do was pick the plan and size I wanted. It implied that the least expensive option was $40 a month. If I scroll it to the left, however, it would in turn give me a hidden $5 a month option, which is what I wanted to test this out on. A quick check shows that their offerings break the de facto cloud rules and apparently charge customers the same prices regardless of which data center that they tend to have these things spun up in. So I'll go ahead and pick San Francisco, which is where I live. This is a very welcome change, by the way. Usually you pay extra for living in certain markets. Now, this is a welcome change, by the way. It's nice to see that I'm not forced to pay extortionately higher prices because I picked a data center that wasn't in the magical, blessed, less expensive place. Now, I hope this isn't hosted by the creaky shack with flickering power known as Hurricane Electric, because I want this instance to stay up for the full 20 minutes I'll be testing it on. In what you might be forgiven for mistaking for a blast from the past, today I want to talk about New Relic. They seem to be a relatively legacy monitoring company, and I would have agreed with that assessment up until relatively recently. But they did something a little out there. They reworked everything. They went open source, they made it so you can monitor your whole stack in one place, and most notably from my perspective, they simplified their pricing into something that is much more affordable for almost everyone. There's even a free tier with 1 user and 100 gigs per month, totally free. Check it out at newrelic.com. Now, at some point, there was a bit of a marketing misfire in a different direction as I continued through this process, because it was almost beyond belief as I saw different options I could add that included IPv6, private networking, and monitoring, all as options I could add, but there was no charge for any of this. The fact that it didn't tell me that this was free meant I had to go hunting because I was looking for the various ways it was going to hurt me. Some advice for DigitalOcean: promote that all of those options are in fact free. It's great to have. Now, as far as authentication goes, it defaults to a one-time password that it will email me that's for root, but it also gives me an SSH key option. The fact that it's a one-time password does give me hope because it beats the hell out of the dismal IBM cloud approach of storing the password forever in clear text, visible in the console to anyone who has console access. Now, SSH keys are, of course, an option too. Selecting the SSH option, though, simply pops open a dialog of paste your public key here, give it a name, and hit save, and then it gets out of my way. What the hell kind of sorcery is this? Doesn't DigitalOcean know it's supposed to blow me completely out of the sign-up flow to a different page to upload my key, go back, and start from scratch? That's what AWS does. Why hasn't DigitalOcean learned that customer hostile lesson? Now, from there, they start asking you about things like tags, which, if you're coming from another cloud provider, is a little bit on the confusing side of things. It isn't really used to expose cost and allocate things in the same way, but upon reflection, their approach is a lot more friendly and does make some sense. There's also a simple checkbox of click here to enable backups, which is freaking awesome. Smart people will select this. Other people need to get it wrong first. I click create droplet, and it's up before I could even do a screen capture of that. It was that quick to provision. This is radically different. In many cases, I think AWS will try and have some of its EC2 instances upgraded to free one-day shipping from the time I request it until the time it gets here. And there was a bit of a challenge there as far as the username in the instance that had my SSH key added was root. My ancient Unix admin origins shudder at the idea of logging in as root, but my modern sensibilities do in turn tell me that root versus any random user account that is automatically allowed to use sudo to gather escalated permissions, they're functionally the same thing. So I'm not sure how to feel about that one. And lo and behold, they did offer a managed database, which is of course my expression of the fact that they will host domains for you and provide a DNS resolution service. Also, as with every other cloud provider, there is in fact a metadata endpoint that lives at a specific IP address, in this case 169.254.169.254, and it's not authenticated, but it also doesn't grant you access to credentials in the same way as a lot of the AWS stuff does, which is part of how Capital One's breach happened. So please don't put credentials inside user data using any provider. There are better ways to get secrets into your systems, but that's a digression. Now, DigitalOcean does offer a bunch of other stuff too, like databases, disk volumes, an object store that they call Spaces, monitoring, a full API, and, because we are definitely in the darkest 2020 timeline here, managed Kubernetes. Great. It was also awesome that they gave me a security logging option that didn't take 20 minutes to log events like CloudTrail does, is extremely easy to understand, and best of all, doesn't charge me for the privilege. This is one of those user-centric features that shows some serious attention was paid to the overall customer experience and making it a cohesive whole. There are a few striking things about this platform. Most notable is that sense of cohesiveness. The databases and Spaces dashboards, for example, don't feel like they're built by demons dwelling in hell, forbidden to talk to the angels on the billing team. There's not a sarcastic number of certifications you can get on DigitalOcean technologies either, because you don't need to. And the bill is basic arithmetic levels of complexity to predict. Beyond that, the documentation's phenomenal. Not only does everything have an authorship date, but also a date of the last time they went through to validate what was contained in the documentation. Oh, well, they're not a serious contender because they don't have an AI-powered piano or a service that can talk to satellites in space. Yeah, whatever you say, tech bro, but take a look at what your company's workloads look like before saying that DigitalOcean isn't feature complete or a serious competitor. My blog post from last October about when to use DigitalOcean versus AWS remains unaltered to this day. It's a terrifically valid option for some workloads. Next, I wound up giving my rabid fan base on Twitter, when I was going through this experience live, the opportunity to determine whether I should offer suggestions to improve DigitalOcean's technology or its marketing. And the answer was technology. So great. That is the less interesting path, though, because DigitalOcean basically gets things right from a technology perspective. Barring services like managed Kubernetes, the core functionality I just tested is largely unchanged for years. There are some edge cases. I saw some complaints about their IPv6 strategy, for example. But this is incredibly well done. It's extraordinarily accessible to newcomers, and it delivers exactly what it says it will on the tin. You can whine or cry about 15 to 50 more managed services you wish that they'd offer, sure, but instead they've chosen to focus on polishing this experience until it largely shines. Even GCP has way more friction in getting a basic VM up, and they're pretty good at that first-time user experience too. In conclusion, DigitalOcean claims over 500,000 customers, and it's not very hard for me to understand why. It was a great user experience start to finish and didn't give me nearly as much to snark about as I'd hoped. Congratulations, DigitalOcean. You deserve it.
This has been a Humble Pod production. Stay humble.